Welcome back, friends. In the last episode, we gave you an idea of where we grew up. Now we want to take you deeper into the 8-year-old mind.
Ooh, age 8. What is it all about? What drives 8-year-olds? And why does this time seem so pivotal when we're talking about our relationship to gender identity?
So let's get into it with our classmate and child psychologist, Dr. Kate, who you may remember from earlier episodes, as well as David and Shalini.
We also wanted to talk to someone on the ground, our resident 8-year-old, meaning the one I live with, my son, Joven. Wait for it.
So let's jump right in, shall we? This is Late in 88.
How you would describe the mindset of an 8-year-old. How do they see the world? What's going on for them?
It's a big time. We have less research about middle childhood. We tend to think about it less in the context of development, but it's super important and it's a really poignant stage. So big things that we think about in terms of worldview for an 8-year-old, a 9-year-old, they're no longer a young kid. So they're heading into this new developmental stage. And the big shift is they go from seeing the world in a sort of inward way and a centralized way to an outward worldview.
Joven, how's grade 4 going? How do you like it?
Work-wise, I think it was actually a pretty big jump. Like grade 3, it would be easy, like fractions and stuff like that. And then now we're getting into decimals is pretty easy, but then there's some harder stuff.
Do you feel like it's different with your friends too than it was last year?
This year I really got into basketball.
Do you play with any girls?
No, not that much. I play with Zev, who are transgender, but I didn't know other than that.
What was that like for you when they came out as trans?
When Zev changed, she was the same personality, but she was a girl.
Do you feel like your school is a safe space? Do you feel safe to be yourself?
Oh yeah.
Have you ever been bullied?
There's Ziggy who bullies me, but I don't really get annoyed by him. He's going to be leaving the school next year. Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to that.
So you don't play with any other girls?
I do have Matea.
Mm-hmm.
We do lots of stuff together.
Joven and Matea were knitting together on the couch the other night, looking very
cool.
serene.
And they were
awesome.
performing magic tricks and stuff.
I remember that Mrs. Mitchie made us do knitting as a class project. I had already learned to knit at home because my mom knit and my grandma knit, and I just thought it was interesting and cool. So I learned how to do it. And then there was a class project. And I remember being embarrassed in a way that I knew how to knit because it is such a gendered thing. This is actually what I think about with my own relationship to gender is that I like to bake, I like to knit, I like to garden. These are often stereotyped, especially in Calgary in 88, as female things to do. It was definitely something that I was becoming more aware of, but more like embarrassed and more like, oh, I better hide these interests and not engage with them. Because instead of just doing it at home, now it's in public in the classroom, and that changes it, right? There's more people that are maybe going to judge one way or the other.
Did you pretend you didn't know how to do it?
I think it was just like pretty slack about it. Didn't really get it done.
It's so interesting because part of why we both landed on grade 4 as being this time that these outside constructs of gender and sexuality started to feel like we were getting hit by them. So it's really interesting that that's a memory for you too. Because prior to that, I certainly didn't have as much of an awareness that what I was doing was more male.
Yeah.
Or more female or whatever, right? There was some, but it didn't feel as embarrassing or that there was some kind of shame associated to it.
A big aspect of being a boy in Calgary at that time was hockey, and I could not skate. So I was very aware that I didn't positively check that box. But then I don't think it was until you get maybe a little older, like grade 4, that it's like, oh, but maybe there's these other things that I am doing that are against a norm. Or we were playing Dungeons and Dragons and video games, and some of us were wearing Guns N' Roses t-shirts, but not all of us. I definitely wasn't. I felt like I didn't fit in, was aware of that, and then trying to figure out how to belong in other spaces, dialing into a bulletin board system in 1989, going online for the first time and feeling like, oh, there's so much more out there. There's all these other ways of interacting with people. And maybe that's a lot more interesting than figuring out how to belong at school.
You mean early internet?
Yeah.
Wow.
Early internet.
If we think about adolescence, where we know very well that peer relationships become the strongest influence and the main point of reference for an adolescent, middle childhood is that gray box where people move from the focus on the primary caregivers to the focus on the peers. And because of that, this is where we start to see the building blocks of self-confidence or feeling inadequate. Because of that outward view, they start to be able to understand how well they are performing on a task or how difficult a task is compared to how their peers are doing in a new way. So it really leads to, comparisons and building, like, what am I good at? What am I not good at? Group membership is also really key here. So the beginning questions of where do I belong? Our group identities are what form our building blocks for self-concept. So like, where do I fit in? Starts to give us clues about who I am inside. So that's another big theme around the way that kids start seeing the world. It's not so much who am I, but like, how good am I? And can I do the things that my peers are doing so that I can be accepted?
Prior to grade 4, I really felt part of the boy group. And it was like around grade 4 when things just started to change a little. I felt like there was a distance growing. Wouldn't get the invitations to hangouts on the weekends. And some of them were a little more overt about it. They were really drawing their line in the sand and saying, no, not anymore. And I found that really frustrating. What does it matter if I'm a girl? I've been a girl this whole time. Like, why now is it an issue? Why can't we just keep having fun?
Yeah, that's exactly how I felt.
Playing Dungeons and Dragons or jumping on trampolines or playing with Super Soakers. I don't understand how me being a girl makes that any less fun.
I had the same experience where I felt very much welcome in an uncomplicated way. And that was a big part of my draw to playing with the boys, was it was uncomplicated. I would show up, join the game, we would play, and then I'd leave. And there was no big deal about it. It was at this age when we hit grade 4 that suddenly they were seeing me differently. I was starting to become one of the girls or even an object of attraction. And that was so deeply uncomfortable for me.
I do feel very fortunate that I was never considered an object of attraction.
Yeah, and I didn't want it.
Yeah.
I had no interest. I was not ready to go there myself. I was an unknowing, budding little queer, and I really was like, I just want to be friends. Do you remember Dave's birthday party?
Oh my God, right?
I have this memory of being at the table full of boys. And I remember these high voices and the screeching and the screaming of them assaulting each other and joking with each other and everything. And I remember looking around the table and then realizing you were there. I was like, oh, there's another girl here. There was maybe a moment of feeling a kinship, but then not crossing that table to go say hi.
Yeah, which is so weird when I come back to think about it. And I think that was one of the last birthday parties. Yeah, the other guys over time just made it really clear that they were not interested in hanging out with a girl anymore, full stop. And that girls took on a different role in their life. And I didn't fit that role. "34 years later, thank you for inviting me to your 8-year-old birthday party." That was a big deal for little grade 4 Bronwin and Elinor.
That's nice to hear all this time later. I don't remember inviting either of you to the birthday, like making that decision. When we were younger, they were like tomboys, but no equivalent to what if you're a boy who likes baking and knitting?
The sad truth of it is the patriarchy makes that a bad thing.
Totally.
Part of the reason I think that the tomboy was seen as a positive is because, of course, a girl would want to be a boy because boys are inherently better. That is the sad truth of it, is why would a boy want to do those seemingly effeminate or perceived as feminine hobbies? The patriarchy, it hurts both men and women and non-binary folk alike. There still isn't really an alternative, like a tom girl or a Jane boy or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, people still use the term tomboy And every year that goes on, it seems a little bit weirder.
Right.
It really exposes that gender is a construct.
Right. You're calling out something that maybe doesn't need to be called out. Maybe.
Yeah. Who decides even what's feminine and masculine?
I feel like I've always existed in the liminal space between genders. I will never forget, at 4 years old, my parents took a trip with my baby brother to look for our new home. My grandmother flew over from England to take care of me for the week while they were away. She was pretty unsettled to see this little tomboy running around playing with action figures. Because of that, it turned out to be the longest week of my little life as I waited for my parents to return. The day finally came, and my grandmother insisted that I look pretty for when my parents arrived home. I tried to fight her off as she forced me into a dark green velvet dress with white lace scratching at my neck and wrists. My heart ached, and I felt crushed into a box that I was never meant to occupy. I knelt on the couch, leaning on the back, sobbing as I desperately looked out the window, awaiting my parents' return. I felt so hurt, trapped by someone who was supposed to love me. I didn't understand why she wouldn't listen to me when I said no. I bolted out the door with tears streaming down my face as that station wagon pulled into the drive. I finally could be free of this ribbon-bound prison and just be me again. After that point, my parents understood that that would probably be the last time they'd ever see me in a dress.
What age do children begin to develop a sense of self as related to gender and sexuality? Do we know that? Does the science know that?
Yeah, the science knows it. And it's a really politically charged conversation. I think that there's lots of opportunity here to misunderstand the data and to misrepresent the data. So I always feel like that's really important to start off with, that there are really reputable bodies of research like the American Academy of Pediatrics, sources that we know to be really founded and based in science in this, and that we do know the answers to these things. There's lots of variability in terms of individual experience, but in general, we know that kids by the age of about 2 start to become conscious of physical differences between male body children and female body children, where they're able to talk about, you have a penis, I don't have a penis, I have a vulva, you don't have a vulva. So there's like that begins as early as 2. Then we start to see by about 3, kids are generally able to label themselves as a gender. And I specifically say label themselves as a gender, not label themselves as boy or girl, because the gender labels that kids identify as at this young age are directly correlated with the gender categories that they believe are available to them. We grew up in a time where nobody was talking about gender diversity and nobody was talking about non-binary and the binary. And so generally speaking, there's real generational shifts in here. I have a 5-year-old and a 2.5-year-old, and my 5-year-old non-binary is in his vocabulary and like recognizes that as a gender that's the same as boy or girl. So thinking about us back in the 80s, most kids were labeling themselves as boy or girl, but that really shifts over time. And I also just politically want to hit the point that that doesn't mean that we make these categories available to kids and then therefore there's some sort of voluntary choice in there. Let's not make those non-binary categories available and no one will choose it. It just means that a kid at that age can't articulate themselves in a category that we haven't made available to them, but they will get there because that's their internal identity. And then by 4, most kids have a pretty stable sense of their gender identity. Again, lots of variability in that, but that's like generally what the science points to.
I feel like in a lot of ways, that's what we've been talking about since the beginning. This idea of rewriting this history of what if we were friends? What if we had a choice? What if we knew the words queer and non-binary? Because I also feel if I knew that was a choice, I would have taken it. Now it's like, okay, I've been doing the she, her thing for a while. Like I'm cool. I've locked in on it. It's good. I'm good with it. But it's been a journey.
Right.
It was a journey that I didn't even know you could go on.
Like, yes, it's about knowing that it's available to you, But it's less about it being a choice per se, as it is like going back to this idea of who do I belong with and who are my people. We are like a collective culture where we're drawn to connection, right? It's what assures our survival. And so it's not just about, ooh, I can randomly make this choice. Like I didn't know that strawberry ice cream was available at this ice cream store.
Oh, I just got psychologized by Dr. Kate. Ouch. Some part of me still thinks it's a choice. I haven't fully claimed that my own gender fluidity is just who I am. That maybe I can just turn it on and off in order to feel safe, in order to fit in and belong if I need to. I clearly haven't fully recognized that it's a part of me that deserves to exist without any kind of defense. And that just is, it's who I am.
It's about something feels different for me inside. The available options that I'm being given don't feel okay to me, but I have to form myself into one of those because this is my survival and this is where my belonging is. And then when we create opportunities to model for kids that there's lots of ways to belong, then it's not about then they can make a different choice. It's that we then allow kids to be themselves.
It's interesting to learn that despite feeling so isolated, many of us shared the feeling that we didn't belong, which Dr. Kate Science really validates. For many of us, gender and sexuality were at the crux of this issue, but for others, there were different external pressures that really affected their sense of belonging. Our classmate Shalini shares her unique perspective on this.
I'm first generation Canadian, where you end up in this time warp, this cultural time warp of these antiquated Indian value systems that are being projected on you. You have all of these other influences saying, hey, this is what you need to learn. This is what you need to be. And I think at the time, it's very much, this is your whole world. You go from your house, you go to school, you come back. It was a time of just trying to understand who you are as an individual and how you fit in. That was a really awkward time and an awkward stage. And certainly for myself, from a family perspective, it was a bit of a tough age too. My parents didn't have a lot at that moment in time. So I remember my mom making all of my clothes. Literally, we would go to the fabric shop, pick out fabrics, and she would make all of our clothes. I remember being super awkward and self-conscious in that phase of life, trying to fit in, trying to understand how to navigate the school and who you are in terms of self-identity.
It's so interesting because I don't think we've talked to anybody who felt like they belonged. I wonder if there's one person in the entire class who belongs and nobody else does. Or if that's just part of the experience.
I think it's part of that developmental stage, right? Like you're just petrified of everything and you have this social balance that's artificially created. Mm-hmm. Because you have a bunch of people slammed together in a room artificially. But there was a group of people, definitely a group of girls that I remember were very together and very exclusionary. So maybe they felt like they belonged.
What did they say? It's 4% of the population that creates war.
Right. Yeah.
Like the rest of the population doesn't want it. So maybe it was actually only 4% of the grade 4 class are the ones that are policing.
They would need to keep everybody else unstable in an effort to maintain their positions of power within the social hierarchy of things.
Did you deal with any racism or feeling like you were an outsider because of your cultural background?
I don't know if it was because of our cultural backgrounds. I think we were pretty lucky. Our cohort was pretty diverse, right? Even if you think of that.
Yeah.
We had people from all over the world. There was people from all over. So the culture piece wasn't such a big thing. I think we were very fortunate to have some pretty good representation, even in the 80s.
It's worth mentioning that as Canadian kids of the 80s, we were actually part of a national shift that moved to protect multicultural rights and actually celebrated this diversity as a part of our Canadian identity. So we did grow up in a diverse cohort.
And we were taught to appreciate each other's backgrounds. Is there racism in Canada? Of course. And that is a whole other podcast. And there are many of them out there that break down our particular dynamics of colonial dysfunction and complexity. Check out the episode notes and our socials for more resources.
It's so interesting to discover how pivotal this age is, like especially in terms of social dynamics and living at that variety of intersections.
Age 8, who knew?
Yeah.
I know for myself that as we've been going through this process and talking to our former classmates, I certainly have identified some coping mechanisms that I developed at this age that I'm still doing. I still have a hard time being in the girls' group.
Right.
I'm still trying to fit in with the boys. I didn't anticipate that when we started this that I would get an opportunity to really realize how my inner 8-year-old was still really actively at work within me.
Yeah.
And it's been very illuminating, humbling.
I found it very comforting to hear that not only is my personal experience validated by the science, as Kate explained, but also to know that like most people felt the same way. Even though we were all experiencing it independently, it does make me feel like, oh, it's not so strange.
You weren't the only one.
Yeah, exactly. We all belong to this big group of people who thought they didn't belong. It warms my elder queer heart to hear the word transgender just roll out of Jovan's mouth so clearly and without any effort. Whereas I find older generations just struggle with this concept that clearly children like 8 and younger understand without issue, which is very telling.
It speaks to what Dr. Kate was sharing about if we give this vocabulary to kids, which is what we did not have, then they can find themselves. Mm-hmm. And if they're lucky enough to be in a supportive family and a supportive community, which in the inner city of Toronto, Jovan has found, for them it really is not that complicated.
This is the way it is.
We're changing pronouns.
Yeah.
And
no big deal.
Let's go back to playing.
Yeah.
Because that's really what they just want to be doing is like, oh, you're a girl now? Okay, can we still keep playing that game we like playing? Great, let's go play. So we can either create an environment where kids have the proper vocabulary and they learn to honor each other and honor themselves, most importantly, or we can teach them what came before.
Yeah.
Kind of our choice at that crossroads, right?
And that is a perfect segue into where we explore episode 4. We're going to keep the ball rolling, and we are going to be talking more about
puberty's coming. You're 8 years old. It's encroaching upon you.
And how girls and boys start taking on different roles as they relate to each other.
So it's time for health class,
Yeah.
friends.
If you're all ready.
Episode 4, come and join us. We're going to continue down this developmental, sometimes squirmy road of learning about our middle childhood. And we're going to dive into sexuality and what it means at age 8. So please join us.
See you then.
Thank you so much for listening, friend. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to our podcast and consider posting a review or sharing it with your friends. It really helps other people find our show. Follow us on socials as well at late.in.88, where we have additional content and welcome you to join the conversation.
Thank you to licensed clinical psychologist Dr. Kate Thomson for your wealth of research, Dave Shalini, and of course, our resident 8-year-old, Jovan.
Late in 88 is created by Bronwin and Elinor Svoboda. Produced by Natasha Winter. Edited by Elfire Media. Sound design by Bernice Chu. Original music by Aaron Hutchinson. Sound mix by Stephen Barden. Publicity by Nice Marmot PR. And artwork by Feisty Creative. We would like to acknowledge the generous support from Canada Council for the Arts. Thank you for lighting a fire under this project.
This podcast is distributed by the Women in Media Podcast Network. Find out more at womeninmedia.network.